You're listening to EFT Radio Online, where we explore meridian tapping techniques for self-help and peak performance. By listening to this audio, you agree to the disclaimer located at eftradioonline.com/disclaimer. If you'd like to get the schedule of all the upcoming EFT radio shows and access to archive shows, please visit us at eftradioonline.com, where you can subscribe to our free newsletter.
Are you a fellow peace seeker who is ready to shine? How would it feel to take back your personal power and be calm and centered in any situation? Join empowerment coach Stephenie Farrell for Live Your Best Life, where we'll harness the power of the law of attraction and the art of creating affirmations. Get ready to say yes to your best life.
Welcome, fellow peace seekers. This is empowerment coach Stephenie Farrell. Thanks for joining me today. I have a very, very special guest online with me, the founder of EFT, Gary Craig. Hi, Gary. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, Stephanie. So nice to be here.
So how about we get started and just talk about what EFT is and how you founded EFT.
Okay, well, I think this is EFT radio. I think most of the listeners probably know about it, so I'll be really brief on that just for those who are new to EFT. EFT is a discovery that I brought to the public in 1995. It's basically an emotional version of acupuncture, except we don't use needles. Instead, we tune into an emotional issue, and instead of using needles to pinpoint and stimulate all these various meridians, we use our fingertips and we tap on certain points and we aim this at the various issues involved. And it's been a very, very efficient process. It has reduced the typical therapy process down from weeks, months, or years down to minutes or hours, and it oftentimes does things you couldn't do in a year. You sometimes do it in one session, sometimes 3 or 4 minutes. It just depends on the circumstances. So anyway, that's basically what it is. We found, although it started out to be an emotional healing process, we found that physical things, including very, very serious diseases, would also get relief from that. I mean, we've gotten people out of wheelchairs, and cancer tumors have subsided, and things like that. And all that comes about because of the rather intuitive idea that our angers and griefs and guilts or emotional things that are unresolved tend to show up physically in various physical ailments. And so as we take care of the emotional things rather handily, if it's properly done, the physical things start to fade as well. So that's sort of a what is EFT in a nutshell.
And can you tell me a little bit more about the history? How did this come about, Gary? How did you create this form of healing?
Well, we're going to be talking about Optimal EFT, and Optimal EFT is actually the latest advancement, and it sort of sits on the history, so your question's a good one. I started out, as I mentioned earlier, just realizing that the use of the meridian system in the therapy process was really quite valuable. And so when I brought EFT out, I didn't have anywhere near the idea about the broad uses for it as I do now. And I was in then what you might want to call, in retrospect, the shallow end of the EFT swimming pool, because I didn't really realize its true power when I started. And so we would aim EFT at symptoms, and we'd tap on certain points, and it usually starts with a little phrase like, even though I have this blank, whatever it is, even though I have this even though I have this anger at my uncle or something like that. And later on, even though I have this sore shoulder, and even though I have this sore knee, et cetera, and then tap, 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 tap. So we're aiming at sort of broad issues. I mean, the sore shoulder and the knee, et cetera, as an example, are symptoms, if you will, of the larger problem, which is emotionally involved, and it really gets involved with specific events and things like that. But we were getting results with that, and good results. And one of the things that I didn't realize then, this would be important for your listeners to know, Stephenie, is that at the time, people that were getting amazing results with this would, of course, write back to me, and I would publish that in my newsletter, etc. And it started to appear as though all you ever had to do with EFT is just start, identifying some kind of issue, and you didn't have to know anything more about it. You just sort of aimed it at that issue, and magic would happen. It would just go away. And that did happen with some people, and of course, those are the ones that talked about it. But most people, and I didn't realize this then, most people did not get those results. Those results were temporary, or they were partial, or they were nothing. And I never heard about those for years. And I found out later on that's because people didn't really realize. People would do this tapping, they wouldn't get any result, but they wouldn't report it because they would see all these other reports of grand things, and they would feel like, oh gee, I don't want to say that, because I'd feel like a failure. So you didn't hear about the people that weren't getting any results, or they were temporary or that kind of thing. But as time went on, we began to realize that there's more. You've got to get down to the causes of these things. If you aim at a sore shoulder or a physical symptom, for example, or you're aiming at your general anxiety, for example, you're aiming at the symptom and not the cause. And then we realized that the cause of these things, was back in the past for people, and they were typically the specific events one had in one's life that give rise to it. Now, I've got a metaphor about that I think is useful here. It's called the tabletop and table legs. Are you familiar with it yourself, Stephenie?
Yes, a little bit. Thank you, Gary.
Okay.
Love to hear that from you.
Okay, well, the tabletop would be the way people normally or usually identify their symptoms. And let's just take someone who's saying, I'm easily rejected as a tabletop. Okay, they would say, I'm easily rejected. Okay, fine. And so rather than go tap on, even though I feel easily rejected, et cetera, which is aiming at the symptom, we instead recognize that tabletop, that I'm easily rejected tabletop, is supported by table legs. And if a tabletop doesn't have table legs, or the table legs are removed, the tabletop falls, and of course the tabletop becomes a non-event. And so I'm easily rejected, and the same as I'm not lovable, or I have a lot of anxiety, or I have this disease or something like that, is really the symptom of it. So what's holding these tabletops up, and I'll use the rejection example again, are these specific events. For rejection, it would be a specific event like the time I was humiliated in the third grade when my teacher told me I was stupid in front of the class. That would be one. Okay, the time when I was told I shouldn't play baseball because I didn't have enough talent. That would be number two. The time when I was called fatso, by my first girlfriend, and on it goes. These are all a bunch of specific events that give rise to rejection. Do you hear the commonality?
So it's like once you clear some of those specific events, then the tabletop just falls?
Well, think about it. You couldn't even know what rejection was unless you had been rejected in the past. Am I correct?
Yes, exactly.
Okay. And so it is all those rejections in the past that give rise to the idea that you are easily rejected now, that tabletop. And so what we do in this case is we go to the causative events, the specific events, and that's where EFT is really good. The more specific you get, the more efficient it is. And we can start collapsing some of those things, some of those specific events in minutes sometimes. Sometimes it will take a whole session depending on what the specific event would be and so on. But after you do a number of those specific events, 5 of them, 10 of them, 15 maybe or something like that, then the whole idea of being rejected or feeling that I'm easily rejected just sort of goes away. And the next time a rejecting type circumstances occur in your life, you don't replay those old past ones. They're just gone. And you can handle it in stride instead of falling out of your tree as far as rejection is concerned and having a big strong reaction. But it would also occur for diseases. The disease is actually the symptom of unresolved emotional issues because all these headaches and pains and one thing and another are reflections of unresolved emotional issues. That's what manifests.
Absolutely. Actually, I was wondering, because I'm very passionate about trauma work, and I wanted to speak to that, the tabletop or clearing up those events. There's been you've had a lot of wonderful success with PTSD.
Indeed, yes. I've dealt with, I don't even remember how many veterans now, yeah.
And would that process be quite the same?
Well, yes, it would be almost identical. The way most people who have learned EFT from these various sources that have sprung up over the years would get a hold of a veteran and they'd start talking, and they would aim it at PTSD, like, even though I have PTSD. Well, that's too broad, and the veteran may well have some, immediate results. He may feel better about it and so on, but it's highly likely that you're going to collapse the PTSD with something like that. That's like pounding on the top of the tabletop expecting it to collapse. You've got to knock the legs out first. Mm-hmm. And so what you do is you go to the various war memories that he has, the time he was in that helicopter crash, the time, he saw his buddy's legs blown off, and the time this happened, all these specific things that give rise to this PTSD. And now you're dealing with causes, and that's what I do. And I don't think I have a single vet ever that I've failed with. If I do, I don't remember who it was.
That's wonderful.
And I've done many, but you've got to do it. You've got to do it in the effective, efficient way. So, and that's get down to specific events and the more detailed you get, the better.
More of those table legs coming out.
Yeah.
Can I ask you a little bit about Optimal EFT now? How did that come about? Could you tell us a little bit about your story? You call it Gary's Revelation, 1988. I'd love to hear some of that, and I think our listeners would be very interested as well.
Yeah, that happened in 1988. That was long before I had ever even heard of or thought of anything called EFT, because EFT came about in 1995. But I was lying in bed one morning. I'd woken up, and I was just lying in bed, and I was going over in my own mind my list of things to do. Okay, and I got to going, and I had piled upon myself more things to do that I could possibly handle in a reasonable amount of time. I have a difficult time saying no. Okay, so I would say yes to all these things, and these things just pile up. And I got very frustrated at the moment. I mean, very frustrated, to the point where I essentially said to myself, who needs this? Now, that may seem like not a very big event, but the thing about that is I really meant that. I mean, it wasn't just an academic statement. I mean, I had, in retrospect, what I did with that statement was it's an important phrase, or quote, let go of this world, unquote. It wasn't like a suicide thought or anything. It was like this whole world, this whole experience, etc. It's just so ominous. What am I doing here, kind of thing, okay? But I really meant it, and I let go of that world. And the moment that I did that, the world as you and I see it, the world of separate bodies and the non-spiritual world, we'll say, all of a sudden just vanished and in its place, just like an air would fill an empty vacuum, came in this spiritual experience. And I was sitting there just in absolute awe. I was in the arms, I was in the presence of the Creator. And there was nothing there but love. I mean, it's very hard to describe to somebody an experience where there's nothing there except love. Things like anger and grief and wars and traumas and all the stuff that we experience in this separated world just wasn't there. And there was this sense of complete protection. I remember it was so healing that I would get the idea that if I could achieve that state again and maintain it, and by the way, that's what Optimal EFT is about. But if I could achieve that state and maintain it, I could walk in, and so could you, Stephenie, or anybody listening. You could walk into a hospital, and your mere presence would be healing. I mean, tumors would start to subside, and headaches would go away, and blood work would look better, and lungs would start to heal. All the stuff, it would start healing just by your presence. Now, that's very hard for people to grasp who've never been there. I never asked you, but let me ask you, Stephenie, have you been there like in that state at any time?
I think I have glimpsed a little bit of that, Gary. It was a time after a very, very painful relationship for me. Abusive relationship that I was in ended, and when that ended, when he left, I became so depressed and just hopeless and fearful and just so sick emotionally and physically. And I had one instance where I was, believe it or not, I was in the bathtub, and it was like my heart just broke open and love poured in. I just had this sense of connectedness and wonder, and it was amazing. Of course, I think that maybe that's what you're describing.
Yes, that's very like what I'm describing. I have had conversations with many people since then that have had a similar experience. Mm-hmm. And in fact, although I was not near death, the whole idea of near-death experiences are very similar to this, and thousands of those have been reported, and several books have been written, and so on, all about this other state that I experienced and you experienced. Let me ask you this about that state, Stephenie. If you could go back to that state, get back in that state again and maintain it, how would your life change?
I would be free. I think there would be complete freedom and complete safety, no fear, just floating in happiness. Just joy and happiness and freedom and love.
And no guilt and no worry and all of that?
Yes, and no shame and no false ego self voice.
Okay,
just
and so
expanding in love.
Yeah, so I'm glad you said that, because therein lies the reason for optimal EFT. Okay. Mm-hmm. Optimal EFT, we'll get into some details in a moment, but its purpose is my purpose with Optimal EFT, to get back to that spiritual experience again. Because once we enter that, then all the healing that we think is useful here in the world of separate bodies, rather than the one of connectedness, all the healing, all the man-made healing, which includes the tapping form of EFT. By the way, Optimal EFT doesn't bother with tapping. But all of that, and also including medicine, is no longer necessary if you get to that ultimate healing state. Now, the practical matter is everybody going to be able to do that? Will I be able to get back there? Will you be able to get back there completely? Mm-hmm. That's unknown at this point. But can we approach it? Yes, and we are approaching it now. I've got a number of people who are starting to use the basics of Optimal EFT, and we're getting remarkable results. We have one result where a lady had a stroke 6 years ago, an elderly lady in her 80s, and she was so disabled by it that she could not walk across her living room without holding on to two different people. She couldn't walk that way. After one session of this with a beginner, she started walking on her own and eventually walked 5,000 meters with just the slightest of limps, and is still able to walk to this day. This is several months, over a year later, actually. I've got a film of her on our website and so on. Now, not everybody gets those results, but I'm pointing that out as one of the possibilities.
Amazing.
But anyway, okay, so I'm glad you've had that experience, because it allows us to talk about this in a more in-depth fashion. Go ahead, I heard a question.
So, Gary, is it like moving away from fear and back into a state of love? That
would be a way to say it. When I first brought out EFT, it was several years after my spiritual experience, and I wanted to bring that concept integrated into EFT. And I kept asking people about it. I would tell them about my experience and so on, and people were nice and they were pleasant, but they really weren't ready for it. They would sort of roll their eyes. They were probably off talking behind my back, thinking I'd fallen out of my tree or something. So people weren't ready for it, so I didn't bring that into EFT to begin with. I just did the tapping, and that tapping by itself was just doing lots of good work and so on. So that's what EFT was, and that to this day, that's what EFT is to other people. It tends to be the tap on the symptoms, and people aren't getting the results they could. But anyway, I put it forward that way, and it has grown as it's grown. But in more recent times, I've been asking people about the spiritual process, involved within EFT, and they're lighting up. Well, tell me more. Well, what is this? Yes, I get that. And so, and you read our website, and it sort of spurred you to give me a call. That's what happened, wasn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It resonates very, very much with me.
Oh, so what happened was, as you may know, I'm an engineer by background. I graduated from Stanford with engineering, so I'm a scientist of the sorts. And if you study quantum physics, you will find they've made a lot of extraordinary discoveries. Quantum physics, for those not familiar with it, is a study of very small things like atoms, and they study the atoms themselves and the parts of atoms and the parts of atoms, and they get into really a lot of detail into what atoms are. And of course, you and I and everything physical that we perceive is made out of atoms. And one of the things they found, and it's very clear, it's very obvious, but it's a very head-shaking, strange thing, and that is, or strange appearing anyway, and that is that at the atomic level, we are all connected. There is no such thing as separation. Separation is actually impossible. So that when you sit in your living room, Stephenie, and you look out your window and you see, let's say, a tree out there, you are seeing the impossible, because it is impossible for a tree to occur out there separated from you. That can't be. Your senses are actually deceiving you. And this has been known in physics for decades. And there many books have been written on it and so on. But we tend not to do anything with it. That's stunning news. That if you think about that, that means everything that you perceive, including your separated body, is an illusion. It isn't really separated. It's all connected. There is nothing but a grand oneness. Now, let me ask you, your senses tell you quite the opposite, but yet your scientists are telling you your senses are fooling you. What's your response to that?
I had that glimpse before of oneness, and I know to the very core of my being that that's true. I just feel that. So yes, the science can definitely support that now.
Well, but I'm going to take it a bit further, and I'm going to ask you a question you didn't expect me to ask here, okay? Assuming you never had your spiritual experience, assuming you never experienced the oneness, that you've only experienced what your senses tell you and that everything is separate. The telephone you're holding in your hand is separate from you, for example. You are separate from me, and you are separate from all the people in the audience and all of that. Here I'm telling you that, and your senses have been telling you 24/7 quite convincingly that you are indeed separate, and yet the scientists come on and say, oh, that's all silly. It's impossible. Now, what's your reaction? What are you going to do with that?
Well, you'd certainly have to be very skeptical, I would say. It would be very, very difficult to believe if that's all you experienced.
Yeah, it would, and therein lies the real challenge here. Now, fortunately, people, even if they haven't had this experience like you and I have had, somehow know intuitively there's something to that. There is something to this oneness, even though they haven't experienced it. A lot of your newer spiritual disciplines are now talking more and more and more about the oneness. Like A Course in Miracles is one of those. I happen to be an avid student of that. I have been for a long time. But so it's pointing to this. So what I did was I started Optimal EFT, and Optimal EFT is in one sense the same as the EFT that we put out on our website, the advanced version known as Gold Standard EFT. And that's on our website. It's all free, and anybody can learn from it. It cost me 30,000 hours of my life and about $2 million to put it in the state that it's in, and it's there for free for everyone.
And that's on EMO Free?
Yeah, emofree.com. Short for emotional freedom, but emofree.com. And so there's two tutorials there. There's a Gold Standard EFT tutorial and a Optimal EFT tutorial. The Gold Standard is the tapping form, and it has within it a very important structure for getting down to the details I talked about earlier. So we're not just tapping on symptoms, we're getting down to what the cause is. And if you'll take EFT at its simplest form, what we're doing is two things. One is we are identifying the issue, and number two, we are bringing peace to the system regarding that issue. And with the tapping form of EFT, we do it by tapping on the various meridians. And so that's the essence of it. And with Optimal EFT, we're doing the same thing. We're identifying the issue, and we're still bringing peace to the system, but rather than do it by mechanically tapping on the meridians, we are instead inviting in a spiritual presence who we are calling the unseen therapist. Now, I call it the unseen therapist because that's a non-denominational name. Depending on one's religion or spiritual experience, they may want to call it something else. They want to call it God, the divine. They want to call it Jesus or Allah or Holy Spirit, or there's all kinds of names, for what people would prefer to call this. So we call it unseen therapist. And we bring that in instead of tapping. And we are getting the same results that we would get with tapping and more. We're still in the beginning stages, but we get the same results we could get with tapping, but we also get results where people are reporting more joy, more peace. Instead of taking 4, 5 or 10 or 15 sessions to deal with several specific events and so on, it's happening in maybe one session that we'll get all these results. So it's making it more efficient. It's doing a lot of things, but it requires a different way of thinking, and not everybody's ready for that way of thinking yet. But it's happening. But anyway, that's the essence of Optimal EFT. I don't know if that spurs questions from you or not, but go ahead.
Well, tell me a little bit more about this idea of separation. I'm somewhat familiar with A Course in Miracles, and they speak of separation. So healing that separation really helps to heal us. But can you speak to, I've heard that there is a very deep underlying sense of guilt, like we're separating from God or from Source. And there's a guilt that comes about from that. Can you speak to that, Gary?
Well, yeah, but that's a concept. I'm happy to speak about it, but it's a concept I've got to say up front that has a lot of different religious threads to it, different opinions about it and different things. So I can only talk about my own understanding of it. And I have to recognize that understanding may conflict with somebody else's understanding, and that's just the way it goes in the spiritual world. There's just a lot of conflict going on. But I will talk about it from A Course in Miracles point of view. Yeah, the idea of that is our original state is the same state you and I fell into, if you will, in our spiritual experiences. That's who we really are. We are actually a child. We are part of one child of God and protected in all this joyous sense that you and I have experienced. Somewhere along the line, we made an error in thinking. Now, we have free will. This is what we're told. We have free will to think whatever we want to think, and we got the notion, gee, what would it be like if we were separate? Would we be more special still? And that is why we now believe we are separate, because we got the notion of it and we're so powerful we made it up. Now, that's very hard for a lot of people to swallow, and you don't have to digest that. You don't have to believe that in order for Optimal EFT to work for you. You asked the question, so I'm giving it to you. But what happened then is outside of our awareness is that because we've separated, we didn't really separate, we can't separate, but we can believe we separated. We created this entire world as an illusion, and it's actually something that we project out, our own fears, angers, guilt, etc., that come about because of the separation. So the world out there is actually our own projection, and it is something that we can turn around and, if we wish, blame things. And that's why you will constantly see all kinds of things out there in the world that you can blame if you want to, from wars and what your Aunt Tilly did and all this kind of stuff. It's a place that appears to be something you have to deal with that's maybe attacking you, but it's actually a projection of our own. Now, that's a real tall tale for many people to digest, but it's an answer to your question. How did I do?
I did great, Gary.
Well, not everybody's going to agree with you on that. And again, I want to emphasize again, you don't have to believe that in order for Optimal EFT to work.
Right. So it's whether, whatever denomination you're of or whatever your beliefs are, Optimal EFT will work.
Yeah, it's designed to be very non-denominational. Now, that's an ambitious phrase, Stephenie, because it's almost impossible to be non-denominational, because almost anything you say in the spiritual realm is bound to have different opinions out there, because there's just thousands of different, spiritual paths.
Very, very true. Can you tell me a little bit more about how is this process different? I mean, from Gold Standard EFT, and you said identifying an issue and bringing peace to the system. Of course, without tapping, you're still bringing peace to the system. So you're allowing the unseen healer to bring peace to the system? Are you acting as a vessel for that?
Well, it would work something like this. It's called the unseen therapist, not unseen healer, just technical. That's okay, technical stuff. But let's suppose, well, here, I'll give you an example. I had a lady call me a while back who had a very serious medical issue. It was called leaky gut syndrome. And what it amounts to is that the intestinal walls, they become very thin, or they get holes in them, etc. And all the bacteria and other garbage that's traversing through the intestine starts to leak out into the system. It gets in the bloodstream and the urine and all throughout the system. And so she had all kinds of very serious symptoms. Headache, bad headaches, exhaustion. She could hardly do anything, and abdominal distress and tightness in various parts of her body, and I mean just a long list of these symptoms. Okay. Now, as I was talking to her, the medical profession would have some pills and things for her to help arrest the symptoms, but had no way to cure it. And so she and I had a little discussion. And I began asking her some questions, because I'm looking for the table legs under the tabletop, all right? The tabletop here is this leaky gut syndrome. The table legs are, to me, the emotional issues that support that, or give rise to that manifest the physical symptoms. And so come to find out, there are times in her life when she had some rather paralyzing experiences. When she was a child and so on, some certain traumas would happen and specific events and so on. So we dealt with, I think, 3 of those in the hour session that we had. And what we did was this. We first identified it. We had a discussion on this, so I wanted to find out what these emotional events might be. And so we identified them. And one at a time, I call it putting it on the table. We took the issue and put it on the table so that nothing was hiding in the system. So we put it on the table. And then we would both be quiet, and we would get in as loving a state as we could. We're doing this instead of tapping. Okay? And then we bring in unseen therapists. We just invite her in. You don't have to go through any routine or anything like that. She's always there anyway, very anxious to help. She just needs to have the open door, and she needs to have the full issue on the table. She can't go into the hidden places and take it away from you. That would be taking away from your free will. But if you got it on the table, she'll just come in and do it. And so we would do that. We were there for maybe a minute or two, being very quiet, and finally she broke the silence and says, well, I think that's okay. And so I asked her about the emotional event. Go back to the emotional event and tell me on a scale of 0 to 10, are you still the 8 you were to begin with? And no, I'm not. I'm more like a 3, I think. Well, what makes it be a 3? And then she starts bringing me up another little detail, we call it aspects. I said, oh, okay, well, let's be quiet. Let's bring an unseen therapist on that little aspect. And we did that. And then I had her try to access this memory again, and she couldn't get upset about it if she tried. And then I asked her about her physical symptoms. Well, her energy was better. Her headache was starting to subside. It was still there, but starting to subside. And the other symptoms were, some of them were still there in the same intensity, but others were starting to subside. So then we went to another specific event, and we dealt with that in the same way. And then another. I think we did 3. And then after that, her symptoms were, I forgot the exact thing, was 60, 70% improved in that hour. And then I talked to her again in a week, and most of them were continuing to subside. And after about 3 weeks, which occurred here a few days ago, I talked to her, and they're just about all gone. She still has a little bit of energy drain at the end of the day, but all the rest of the symptoms are just gone. They're just gone. That was one session, okay? But that gives you an idea of how it works. What I want to point out is we didn't just say, oh, gee, let's bring in unseen therapists to take care of this leaky gut. Because and sometimes, by the way, that will work because there's not very much hidden in the system regarding the emotional causes. But it's usually best to get in there, get the emotional causes, get them out, and put them on the table. That's why Gold Standard EFT is so much more efficient to enter into Optimal EFT. Training in that is much more efficient to enter into Optimal EFT than just the forms of EFT that one learns on the internet and all the other sort of imitations that have cropped up. Mm-hmm. Again, I'm talking a lot, but how did that work?
That was beautiful, Gary. That's amazing. So just getting quiet and becoming loving, connecting, and allowing that unseen therapist to come in and to really do the work.
Yeah, and there's a skill to that, by the way. It is not always as easy as you might think. It's more easily said than done quite often because you'll get quiet and then there's a bunch of chatter comes on, all that stuff. So there's a little practice involved, but we've got a whole process already developed on our website that anybody can start learning from. All the theory is there, and it's all free. And I've done 26 or 7 full webinars now where people are asking questions. We're actually doing this with people, and you can do it along with people with the recordings and all of that, just as though you were part of the audience. And a lot of people are getting healing just watching and following along with the webinars. So.
That's amazing. So for our listeners who would like to get more information, that's on your website, emofree.com.
Yeah. And for Optimal EFT, when you get to that home page, you'll see there's a place you can click for Gold Standard EFT and a place you can click for Optimal EFT. So click for Optimal EFT and you'll find those instructions right there.
Wonderful. And the webinars as well. You're still having webinars every second Sunday, I believe?
Every second Sunday at 10 a.m. my time. It's a video conference, so everybody can see everybody. It's really kind of a fun event.
Oh, that's wonderful. Well, Gary, I'm so, so grateful for your time. Thank you so much for joining me. And such a pleasure to have you here. So generous. All of this information is free, folks. So generous indeed.
So it's all there for everybody. So come on and join our webinars. You can ask questions there if you want to live, and there we are.
And you're on the webinars, are you?
Oh, sure. I conduct them, yeah.
And how wonderful is that to have a question, folks, and to be able to ask the founder your question and get the answer. So thank you so much, Gary. Please, folks, go onto the website, emofree.com, and look for Optimal EFT there. Thank you, Gary, once again for joining us today. Such a wonderful pleasure.
All right, Stephenie. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, bye.
Bye-bye.
Hi, this is Coach Stephenie Farrell. I understand what it's like to struggle with fear, anxiety, and frustration. I've fallen on my face more times than you care to count. But what I've learned is this: the only way to change your life is to change how you feel. I totally get how overwhelming it is to take that first step. But you don't have to do this alone. Email me at Stephenie, that's STEPHENIE, at purpose-power-peace.com
and claim your complimentary Breakthrough to Self-Empowerment session, where we'll create a personalized strategy for living your best life.